Welcome to Reform Thinking. So today we are taking you on a deep dive into something that honestly feels like it was written yesterday.
Yeah, even though it is from, what, 1699,
July 2nd, 1699. To be precise,
right?
Jonathan Edwards stepped into a pulpit in Cambridge and he basically declared a philosophical war.
He really did. I mean, you have to think about the setting. The Enlightenment is brewing. The scientific revolution is just totally shifting how people view reality.
Yeah, everything is changing. And into that specific cultural tension, he preaches this sermon. The title alone gives you a sense of the scale he is working with.
Oh, for sure. The eternal and intrinsic reasons of good and evil.
It is a massive title for a massive topic.
It is. And he anchors the entire argument in just one single line from the Psalms, Psalm 119, verse 142.
Which says, thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth.
Yeah. That one verse carries so much theological weight. Edwards uses it to build this absolute fortress against a rising tide of moral relativism.
Which is our goal for this deep dive. We are going to unpack his premise that right and wrong are not human inventions. They are not arbitrary customs that some society just agreed upon to keep the peace.
No, not at all. He is saying they're eternal realities. They are built right into the fabric of human nature and into the universe itself.
And for you, the listener, this is incredibly relevant. We live in an era of just constant information overload, right?
Yeah, where morality often feels like shifting sand. Like what society accepts today might be condemned tomorrow.
Totally. It is largely dependent on, an algorithm or just the current mood of public opinion.
Well, Edwards offers a permanent, unchangeable standard of truth. He argues for an objective reality that sits beneath all the shifting opinions of the world.
So let's start at the absolute top of his argument, because if we follow his logic, we are looking at a divine blueprint.
Right, the very source of it all.
If morality is eternal, it begs the question, where did it exist before humans were even around? Before the earth was even formed?
Yeah.
We are talking about the state of things before Genesis 1.1.
Edwards establishes his first major point right out of the gate here. He asserts that the rules of what is just and right were determined and fixed from eternity.
Because they are based directly on God's own nature and mind.
Yeah. He states that goodness could not be derived from angels or from men, for the simple reason that angels and men were themselves created by God.
So the created things cannot be the source of the absolute standard.
Well, precisely. The standard has to predate the creation.
Mm-hmm.
Human goodness is just a copy of the original. It is an echo of the essential goodness found in the supreme being.
He even brings in a Gentile philosopher to back this up, which I found fascinating. Plato.
Yeah, Plato called the law of nature the finding of being. Goodness is not something God just invented on a whim on a Tuesday. It is an extension of his very existence.
That distinction is so vital. I think we often confuse positive law with natural law.
Oh, all the time.
Like, think about traffic laws. We drive on the right side of the road here, but in the UK, they drive on the left. Neither side is intrinsically more moral than the other.
Right. It is just a positive law we establish to avoid crashing into each other. It's an arbitrary institution.
But mathematics is different. 2 + 2 = 4. That is universally true. It is a constant. It was true before humans existed to count apples or build pyramids.
And Edwards is saying morality is like mathematics, not like traffic laws. It has that same unalterable status as a mathematical truth.
Wait, hold on, though. If goodness is just baked into God's nature, isn't that still arbitrary? Like, it is just arbitrary based on whoever happens to be sitting on the throne of the universe.
That is a really common objection.
Because if goodness is just an eternal mathematical constant, does that make it impersonal? Does it make God into this cold calculator just enforcing an equation?
Edwards anticipates that line of thinking, actually. He describes the mind of God in a way that shatters the idea of a cold equation.
How so?
He says this eternal law is highly personal because it reflects the understanding and the will of God himself. Edwards writes that God's understanding is fraught with truth, and his will is replenished with goodness.
Fraught with truth and replenished with goodness. Those are striking phrases. They carry a real sense of overflowing abundance.
They do. They show that this standard is living and breathing. It is tied to a perfect supreme mind. The moral law is the pattern of God's holy nature.
So when humans participate in goodness, they are partaking in something that reflects the divine nature.
Yeah. It is the root of all rectitude and justice. Because God is unchangeable, the moral laws based on his nature are unchangeable.
Okay, so if this eternal law exists in the mind of God, we have to figure out the mechanics of how it gets down to us on Earth.
Right. We have to move from the creator to the creature.
How does Edwards explain mankind's innate sense of this morality? Because we obviously have some sense of it.
He argues that innate notions of good and evil are imprinted on the human soul at its creation. And the reason for this is that man is made in the image of God.
Okay, that makes sense. If truth and goodness are essential to the divine nature and we are made in his image.
Then those excellencies are inseparable from the human soul. They are built in.
But the immediate objection that critics of natural law raise here is the developmental argument.
The infant argument.
Yeah. People look at an infant and say, well, a baby doesn't show any understanding of right and wrong. They just cry when they are hungry and take toys from other kids.
Right. They ask, if morality is baked into the hardware, why doesn't it show up on day one?
And Edwards handles that objection brilliantly. He uses a structural comparison.
He points out that an infant also does not show rational thought. A baby cannot do algebra. They cannot engage in a philosophical debate.
Yet we know the human soul is rational by nature.
Yeah, the faculties simply exert themselves later in life as the child matures. The mental impressions of morality are the first emanations of our natural frame.
So the hardware is installed from conception, but the software just takes time to boot up and run the programs.
That is a great way to put it. He also brings in John Calvin to address the reality of the fall, which is crucial here.
Yeah, because he knows mankind suffers from an early apostasy. Our faculties are corrupted, and we have this strong inward pull toward vice.
Right. And you, the listener, probably know the reformed view of total depravity, the idea that every part of our nature is affected by the fall.
But Edwards highlights a crucial nuance in Calvin's theology here. Calvin strongly asserted the original depravity of mankind, but he was also positive that there remains a natural instinct of divinity in the soul.
The sensus divinitatis.
Yes, the sense of the divine. Calvin spent an entire chapter proving the existence of this inbred principle in the minds of all men.
So even in our fallen state, we retain this inward signature. Total depravity means the corruption is extensive, affecting every faculty, but it does not mean the original image of God is entirely eradicated.
And we see this practically applied by the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 2. Paul writes about the Gentiles who do not have the written law.
Right, they do not have Moses. They do not have the Ten Commandments carved in stone.
But they still do the things contained in the law by nature.
Because they have this inward law in their own minds. God's hand engraved these original characters onto their hearts. It instructs them on the great duties of natural religion.
Edwards paints a vivid picture of this inward director acting as an active spark, and it is constantly fighting against a massive deluge of vice.
Yeah, he lists impediments like passion, prejudice, interest, and pleasures, things that are constantly trying to put out that spark.
But if we have this internal alarm system, look at the world. The world is a mess. People ignore the alarm constantly.
All the time.
So how does Edwards reconcile the existence of the alarm with the sheer volume of historical atrocities?
Well, the tension you are identifying is central to his worldview. This inward law acts as a preserving force. Its primary function is to keep humanity from being wholly bereft of justice.
So it is just holding the line.
Yeah, Edwards says it buoys up goodness when it is sinking. It supports it when it is falling.
Wow.
Without this internal principle constantly pushing back against our baser passions, the world would have long since been absorbed by atheism and profaneness.
So it functions as a stabilizing mechanism. It prevents total societal collapse.
God took care to engraft these moral impressions into the heart of every person, whether they are learned or illiterate. This ensures that we are never completely alienated from a sense of what is virtuous.
The fact that there is still any face of religion or morality in the world, despite our general corruption, is proof that this active spark is still burning.
And Edwards does not just leave this in the realm of theology. He actually acts like a psychological detective.
He really does. He points to 5 universal human behaviors as proof that this telltale heart actually beats inside all of us.
Let's walk through those because they are fascinating.
The first one is excusing sins. Think about the Garden of Eden. The immediate reaction to the fall wasn't confession. It was PR. It was spin.
Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent.
Edwards argues that when we use titles of virtue to disguise our bad actions, we are secretly admitting that virtue is superior.
Yeah. If someone is acting out of selfish ambition to destroy a rival at work, they rarely admit it openly.
Right. They will say they are acting out of concern for the company's future or protecting the integrity of the team. They disguise the vice in the clothing of virtue.
Because if vice was actually a good thing, we would just own it. We would proudly state our selfishness.
But we don't. We emulate the likeness of virtue because deep down, we know vice is base and reproachful.
Our constant need to spin our bad behavior is palpable proof that we recognize an objective standard.
Which leads to his next point. Our bodies betray us even before we get caught.
The physical reaction of blushing. Why do we hide in corners to do wrong? Why do we fly to coverts and fear discovery?
We don't commit crimes in the town square. We wait for the cover of darkness.
The text brings in an ancient father of the Christian church, St. Chrysostom, and he asked a brilliant question about Adam.
Yeah, why did Adam hide after he sinned, seeing as there was no written law at the time, there was no Bible yet, there was no Leviticus?
And Chrysostom's answer is that Adam was self-instructed in the knowledge of virtue. He had a natural inbred knowledge that he had done ill.
Edwards also points to Cain, who refused to say where his brother Abel was. Vice is so ugly and deformed that humans naturally want to mask it.
Virtue, on the other hand, is daring. It carries confidence. It does not need to hide.
So the inward bashfulness and dejection of soul we feel when we do wrong proves we are acting against our native design.
And that bashfulness often turns into something much darker: remorse and regret. The internal torture of guilt.
This is the third proof. The telltale heart beating so loudly it drives a person mad. Cain complained his burden was too great to bear.
Judas sank into absolute despair from the horror of his guilt.
Edwards quotes a Latin satirist who said, "They sweat with the secret consciousness of guilt."
Think about the neuroscience of that. The physical manifestation of a troubled conscience. Your heart rate increases, your palms sweat, your stomach drops.
The physical feeling is proof of an eternal moral reality. Your body is physically reacting to a spiritual violation.
Edwards provides incredible psychological insight here. He says that sin causes extreme anguish because it is a violent distortion of our primitive natural temper.
So when we do something immoral, we are acting contrary to our rational nature.
It is like putting diesel fuel into a car that requires unleaded gasoline. The engine starts knocking and breaking down because it is receiving something contrary to its mechanical design.
The inward inquietude and torment we feel is our own mind establishing the equity and goodness of the moral law.
Then we see the fourth proof, the dread of consequence that haunts the minds of evil men, the fear of punishment.
Belshazzar, the great Babylonian monarch, fell into fits of shaking and trembling when he saw the handwriting on the wall. His conscience reminded him of his profaneness.
King Herod hallucinated that John the Baptist had risen from the dead to torment him after Herod had him murdered.
Roman emperors experienced this as well. Tiberius was unable to conceal his terrors after his unnatural lusts and cruelties.
And Nero, after his prodigious villainies, was haunted by spirits and flames in his own mind.
Now, there is a counter-argument to this that has been around for centuries, long before Karl Marx called religion the opiate of the masses.
Right. Some argue that this fear of punishment is just a political invention.
They claim that wise rulers invented the concept of divine judgment to awe their subjects and keep the peasants in line.
But Edwards dismantles that argument by pointing to the absolute monarchs themselves.
Yeah, if the fear of judgment was just a tool invented by rulers to control the lower classes, why are the rulers themselves terrified?
Belshazzar, Herod, Tiberius, and Nero had absolute earthly power. They had no human authority to fear. No police force was coming to arrest them.
Yet they were consumed by dread. This proves the dread flows from natural dictates of the mind.
They know they have broken an obligation, and that knowledge unavoidably breeds fear of a final recompense. Even the dictator cannot escape his own conscience.
That brings us to the fifth behavioral proof, which is perhaps the most ironic. Even vicious people esteem virtue.
Yes, bad people hate pride in others. The most arrogant person you know probably cannot stand being around other arrogant people.
Thieves hate being robbed. A common thief would rather find something than steal it from someone else.
When he does steal, he disapproves of the practice in himself. Or at the very least, he detests it when others steal his stolen goods.
Perfidiousness and treachery are universally abhorred, even by those who employ traitors.
The assassin wants to be paid, which shows there is no natural temptation in the act of murder itself. It requires an external reward.
Edwards quotes Julius Caesar, who was quoting Euripides. Caesar said, "If right at all may be violated, it must be for the sake of a crown, but in other matters let us be exactly just."
Wait, I think the phrasing is, let us be entirely just.
Ah, yes, entirely just. Even an invader who is overthrowing a republic acknowledges that justice is good.
He just lets his personal interest warp his judgment in one specific area to get what he wants. It proves that virtue is praiseworthy in its own nature.
We have an inward principle making us pay respect to honesty and disparage what is unlawful, even if we hypocritically fail to live up to it in our own actions.
So from there, Edwards moves from internal psychology out to the global stage. He argues for universal consent.
Right. Does everyone agree on these moral realities? He quotes the ancient Roman orator Tully, who said that when all people agree in a thing, we must look upon it as the law of nature.
He also quotes Valerius Maximus. Maximus noted that even the barbarous Scythians, whom the Romans considered utterly uncivilized, took careful religious care of their fathers' tombs.
So respect for parents and ancestors spans across totally disconnected civilizations.
Maximus remarked that nature is the mistress of piety, so we do not need to be taught it. Solid virtue is born with us, rather than fashioned by society.
Just and right are everywhere the same. To borrow from Aristotle, fire burns here and it burns in Persia too. The natural law is universally applicable.
But we have to address the glaring historical exceptions, because Edwards deals with scholars like Mr. Selden, who argued against this.
Selden argued that there is no universal law because pagan cultures are far too vicious.
What about cultures with totally different morals? Edwards mentions tribes eating the dead, or even dispatching their old, sick parents.
How can he claim universal consent when practices like that are documented? It seems like a massive contradiction.
Edwards navigates this by differentiating between primary principles and secondary deductions.
Okay, break that down for us.
The primary principle is the core, inbred notion of morality. The secondary deduction is how a culture applies that principle to a specific situation.
Got it.
He uses idolatry as an example. The primary dictate of natural religion is that a deity ought to be worshipped. Every culture shares that primary principle.
The corruption, the idolatry, happens when they apply that worship to the wrong object, like a golden calf or a celestial body.
Yeah, the primary principle remains intact. The application is flawed by a darkened understanding.
Applying that to the extreme examples, like killing a sick parent, how does that fit the theory?
He points out that those specific barbarous cultures viewed dispatching a suffering parent as a courtesy.
Oh, wow.
They saw it as an act of mercy to end their misery before their bodies failed them completely.
So the primary principle, honoring and caring for one's parents, was the motivating factor. They just drew a false, twisted conclusion about how to execute that honor.
Exactly. The essential laws of good and evil are acknowledged even when the cultural application goes terribly wrong.
Edwards also dismisses the behavior of those who willfully debauch and distemper their reasons. He says the universal rule applies to sound minds.
If someone deliberately shuts their eyes against the light and gives themselves over to their lusts, they distort the law of nature.
But we do not judge the existence of a universal mathematical law by the behavior of a person who is actively trying to fail a math test.
That is a great analogy. Edwards is setting up a defense against the chaos of relativism here.
He asks us to run a thought experiment. What happens if we reject this entire premise? Let's assume right and wrong are completely arbitrary.
Let's assume morality is just whatever society decides it is at any given moment.
He outlines 3 logical disasters that occur if morality is not intrinsic. The first is a direct hit to human reason.
He says that if virtue and vice are casual and contingent, then our faculties were given to us simply to cheat and abuse us.
We have a deep, innate sense of justice, fairness, and truth. If none of that is real, if it is all just a social construct, then our own minds are constantly lying to us.
About the most significant aspects of existence, no less. Edwards argues this would destroy the concept of a deity entirely.
Because if there is a God, it would be a reproach to his goodness and wisdom to implant such false and erroneous notions into the souls of all men.
The second logical disaster is honestly jarring. If there are no fixed laws of goodness, we could live however we want. What is lawful today could be unlawful tomorrow.
Edwards goes further. He says that without intrinsic morality, God could command us to hate him or to hurt our neighbors, and it would technically become our duty.
This touches on the classic Euthyphro dilemma from Greek philosophy. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good?
Edwards firmly plants his flag in the latter camp, but with a reformed clarification. It is good because it reflects God's eternal nature.
Right. Some voluntarist thinkers argue that goodness is just whatever God commands, regardless of what the command actually is. God's will is so absolute that he could declare cruelty to be virtuous.
Edwards rejects that entirely. If goodness were merely arbitrary, the universe becomes terrifyingly unstable.
Imagine a universe where God commands cruelty, and you have to obey it to be considered righteous. It strips away the meaning of the word good.
God commands goodness because goodness is intrinsic to his character. He cannot deny himself.
That leads directly to the third consequence. Our happiness would be totally precarious and uncertain.
The happiness of rational creatures depends on the goodness of their actions. If the rules are arbitrary and constantly shifting, we would never know the true end of our lives.
We would have no stable direction to steer by. We would just be floating in the void, hoping the arbitrary rules do not change while we are sleeping.
Edwards doesn't just build a positive case, though. He goes on the offensive. He engages in a philosophical battle royale against thinkers spanning thousands of years.
Let's spend some time analyzing these opponents. Understanding what Edwards was fighting against clarifies his own position immensely.
He starts with the ancients. He mentions the skeptic Pyrrho, the Epicureans, and a Gnostic named Carpocrates.
Pyrrho taught that there is no difference between good and evil by nature, but only by law and custom.
So the idea was that a wise man wouldn't hesitate to commit theft or adultery if he had a fit opportunity, because there is no natural turpitude in those acts.
Turpitude being an inherent baseness or depravity. For Pyrrho, the baseness was a fiction created by the rabble of fools.
And the Epicureans, according to Tully, believed that justice was a vain and frivolous thing, an empty sound of words.
And Carpocrates, what is the Gnostic angle there?
Well, Carpocrates was an early Gnostic who avowed that all moral actions are indifferent.
Gnosticism generally held a deep disdain for the physical, material world, seeing it as a corrupt creation of a lesser deity.
For some Gnostics, this meant strict asceticism, but for Carpocrates, it meant extreme antinomianism.
Since the physical body and its actions don't matter to the pure spiritual realm, physical actions like stealing or sexual immorality are morally neutral.
Good and evil are founded entirely on human fancy, not spiritual truth. Edwards points out that this ancient heresy is basically the root of all modern relativism.
He then moves closer to his own time, addressing writers within the Church of Rome. He specifically targets Bellarmine, a highly influential Catholic theologian.
Edwards outlines Bellarmine's argument that the Pope has such a plenitude of power that he could dispense with the laws of right and wrong.
Bellarmine argued that if the Pope were to command the practice of vice and forbid virtue, the Church would be obliged to believe vice to be good and virtue to be evil.
Edwards counters this staggering claim by utilizing the writings of Hugo Grotius, a famous Protestant jurist and philosopher.
Grotius argued that even God himself cannot change the law of natural goodness. God cannot make what is intrinsically evil to be no evil, because that would require God to change his own nature, which is utterly impossible.
If God cannot alter the natural moral law, then certainly no human authority, regardless of how much ecclesiastical power they claim, can alter it either.
Edwards is forcefully arguing against any system that makes morality subject to human decree, even religious human decree.
He then takes aim at the Gallic philosopher René Descartes.
Descartes leaned toward a strong form of voluntarism, the idea that goodness and truth depended entirely on the free divine will.
Descartes suggested God could have determined the laws of math and morality otherwise, if he had pleased. God could have made 2 + 2 = 5.
Edwards respects Descartes' intellect, but says he made a catastrophic mistake by separating God's will from his real intrinsic nature. Goodness is invariable because God's nature is invariable.
We then arrive at Thomas Hobbes. Edwards summarizes Hobbes's view bluntly. He says, "The magistrate is Mr. Hobbes's God."
For Hobbes, writing in his famous work Leviathan, mankind and the state of nature is in a war of all against all.
In that primitive state, nothing is just or unjust. Morality only arises from the social compact.
The prince, or the state, decides what is right and wrong to maintain order, and the state can unmake those rules at will.
Edwards dismisses Hobbes's logic rather sharply. He notes that this system only makes sense if you believe, as Hobbes essentially did, that a human being is nothing more than a body or a carcass in motion.
If there is no soul, no eternal image of God, then sure, the physical power of the state is the ultimate authority.
But Edwards has already spent half the sermon proving the soul's rational, moral nature through the 5 behavioral proofs. If the conscience exists, the state is not God.
There was another group gaining traction at the time who wanted to reduce everything down to matter and motion. The mechanists or the experimental philosophers.
These thinkers argued that all moral notions come purely from physical senses. They believe that God delineates ideas of moral actions onto our minds through the physical motion impressed upon our sensory organs.
Edwards offers 4 distinct refutations to this empirical, mechanistic view. First, he asks how abstract ideas of goodness can come from mere bodily objects.
Right. Try to weigh a poem on a digital scale. Try to find the exact atomic weight of justice.
You cannot see, smell, or touch justice, so how does a physical atom hold the concept of it?
It is a category error.
Spot on. Second, he points out a glaring theological problem. If morality only comes through physical senses, then angels, separate souls, and God himself would not be capable of understanding morality.
Because they lack physical bodies. If morality is entirely physical, God wouldn't know right from wrong.
Third, he says it is a confusing jumble of physics and ethics, mixing up the material cause with the moral reality.
And fourth, it makes all morality contingent and uncertain. Physical objects and sensory inputs are constantly shifting.
Our physical bodies decay and alter. If morality is based on shifting physical motions in our brain chemistry or sensory organs, it can never be a stable eternal law.
Edwards also offers an implicit critique of John Locke. He does not name him directly, but he targets the popular argument that denies innate ideas because children and individuals with severe cognitive impairments lack them.
Edwards uses a simple logical counter. Those individuals also lack the full exercise of reason and prudence. But that does not mean reason and prudence do not exist as standard faculties in mankind.
The logic of the blank slate is fundamentally flawed. What Edwards heavily criticizes here is the downstream conclusion of that logic.
The idea that virtue is simply whatever gains public esteem, or the consent of private men.
If there is no innate standard, then virtue is just what the public praises, and vice is just what the public blames.
Edwards calls that the Leviathan epitomized. It is just Hobbes, dressed up in different clothing. It subjects eternal truth to the whims of the crowd.
Having waged this massive philosophical defense, Edwards moves to the practical application. What are we supposed to do with this massive theological reality?
How does it change the way a Christian actually lives?
He gives a clear mandate. Let this doctrine be a mighty incentive to all virtue and goodness.
Because virtue is consonant with our natural principles and dispositions, we have every reason to comply with it.
Edwards asks a penetrating question. Why should we contradict our own propensions and be rebels to ourselves?
He uses an analogy from physics. In natural motion, things aim for right and straight lines, not crooked ones. A dropped stone falls straight down due to gravity.
In the same way, man's reasonable nature aims at direct and plain duty. When we deviate from the right path, we are acting against our true primitive temper and genius.
We ought to be virtuous because our very nature obliges us to it. The intrinsic beauty of goodness itself invites us.
Edwards acknowledges the reality of our condition. Our wills are miserably shattered by original depravity. We cannot execute this natural law perfectly.
But these original impressions are the indelible stamp of God on every soul. They cannot be wholly expunged.
Stop fighting your own design. Let reason, not passion, dictate your actions.
He calls the congregation to manfully break through all obstacles and impediments. We must be vigorous and zealous in the ways of religion.
He ends by noting that this natural morality is a stepping stone. It points us toward the higher strain and improvement, which is the institution of the blessed Jesus.
Conformity to Christ is necessary for salvation. The natural law condemns us by showing us our failure, driving us to the perfect obedience of Christ.
We must be firm and constant in our duty, letting it appear in our lives that our love for goodness is based on solid judgment, not just fleeting passion or imagination.
I want to circle back to the warning Edwards gave about public esteem. He warned against the idea that virtue is simply what the public praises.
In our highly connected world, public opinion shifts by the hour. We have constant, immediate access to external validation through social media and cultural consensus.
If we train ourselves to rely solely on external validation, that public esteem Edwards warned about, do we risk permanently muting the internal, innate moral alarm system?
If you are constantly looking outward to a screen for approval, are you ignoring the very image of God stamped on your own soul?
If Edwards is right, you don't need a cultural consensus to see the truth of your moral condition. The diagnostics are built into your very design.
You just have to be willing to feel the pulse of that telltale heart. Thank you for joining us on this massive intellectual deep dive. We will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.